Today, before I start, we're going to be in John 19, but I just want to kind of recap over the past few weeks about what we've been talking about. We've gone through the Last Supper, we've gone through Jesus washing the disciples' feet, we've gone through the fact that he was betrayed in the garden, and then we've also gone through that Judas betrayed him, and the betrayal in the middle of the night that was obviously illegal and it wasn't done the right way. And here we are now, where Jesus is being sentenced to be crucified. So we're going to start off John 19, 1 through 27. Then Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged. The soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head. They clothed him in purple robe and went up to him again and again, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they slapped him in the face. You know, when I was saved many years ago, I read this passage, and obviously being a young Christian, I was on fire and I wanted to know how Jesus died, why he died for us. And I got angry, saying, if I saw Jesus, I wouldn't do that. Slapping him, mocking him. If Jesus was in front of me, I would know. I would know. You know what the truth is? We do the same thing. We may not slap him, we may not put a crown of thorns on his head, we may not mock him, but every time we deny him, maybe we don't do what we're supposed to do, maybe we don't say the things we should say, maybe we don't pray like we ought to, we're doing the same thing. But here, a little backstory. See, Pilate was over the Jewish community in this area, but he was already warned beforehand that there was another Jewish uprising. He wouldn't just lose his job, he would lose his life. So here, at the beginning of the trial, he was already stepping back, going, okay, the Jews are in an uproar over this guy named Jesus. I could really care less, but if they act out, I'm in trouble. So to kind of compromise at the beginning of this passage, we see what he's saying. He's saying he took him to get flogged, he took him to get punished, but he had nothing to do with his crucifixion, as we're going to read. Once more, Pilate came out and said to the Jews gathered there, "Look, I am bringing him out to you to let you know that I find no basis for a charge against him." When Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe, Pilate said to them, "Here is the man." So he was already punished. And when you understand flogging, let me give you a little history. I'm sure some of you know what it is. It's not just a whip. Oh, no. See, that would be too easy for the Romans. It was actually called the cat of nine tails. And what that means is there was 9 different bristles on the end of this whip. And it wasn't just leather. Some of them had nails, some of them had glass, some of them had shards. They were to rip flesh from your body. They were not meant to just punish you. They were not just meant to whip you. They were meant to rip the flesh from your back. So when he says he was being flogged, it was not just merely a little slap on the wrist. He was literally getting flesh ripped from his back. And even at the midst of Jesus going through this excruciating pain, and again, for us, for even those doing it to him, could you imagine that? Could you imagine getting the flesh ripped from your back? And the whole time you're doing it, 1, you're not even guilty. 2, you're doing this for the exact person that's ripping the flesh from your skin. That's what Jesus did. And as we continue, as soon as the chief priests and their office officials saw him, they shouted, "Crucify him." So let's take a step back. What was Jesus really in trouble for? Was he guilty of sinning? We know he wasn't. Was he guilty of treason? No. He was guilty for loving us. He was guilty because he was claiming who he really was. See, in the Old Testament, Jesus was the only person throughout time that fulfilled every prophecy written in the Old Testament. The birth, the way he did ministry, the way he was baptized, the way he even died, the way he was betrayed, all lines up with Old Testament references. Not one other being ever did that. Yet, here's the miracle. Here's the thing that I don't understand the most, and this is what really troubles me, especially with the Pharisees. Now, they're the top dogs, right? They're the most spiritual. They're the most, whatever you want to call them. I have other words I'd like to call them, but let's just keep this PG. They hated him. They did not like him because he was speaking truth. How often do we run into people that don't like the same thing? He was speaking truth. That's all he was doing. He wasn't trying to offend them. He wasn't trying to hurt them. He was trying to save them. But here we have the Pharisees, the most religious people. They knew the Old Testament better than anyone around. They knew by heart. They've been studying since they were a child. Yet they themselves could not see the miracle standing in front of them. They knew everything that had to happen. The virgin birth, where he was born, how he was born, the way he was raised, the way he came to do ministry, the way he called fishermen, the way he did miracles. All of it was from the Old Testament. All of it. Yet here Jesus stood, and instead of embracing it, what did they say? Crucify him. Crucify him. Now, I don't know about you, but I think we all have pretty soft hearts. And if we saw a man pretty much beaten to death, most of us would say, okay, he's pretty much got no back left. He pretty much has been beaten, slapped, mocked. Most of us would probably say, you know what? He's learned his lesson. Not here. Even though this man was standing there bleeding, probably shaking from the pain, bruised, humiliated, it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough. And ironically, what's even worse is this is right before Passover. One of the most big, in the Jewish, there's few holidays, but this is one of the biggest, Passover. Yet even during this time of the season, they wanted him dead. And his biggest sin was love and claiming, and again, I use claiming very loosely, but claiming who he already was. He was who he said he was. But for that, let's crucify him. But Pilate answered, "You take him and crucify him. As for me, I find no basis for a charge against him." Now, biblically, when we read the different books, the Gospels, there's different takes and there's different things. But one of the things historically that we know is his wife became a believer, Pilate's wife. And there is documentation that she tried to warn him and tell him, you want nothing to do with this man's death. Nothing. So it's not just his worry that he thinks he's an innocent man. And we'll see in a little bit how I'm a believer in reading the way that John and all the Gospels wrote this, that I think Pilate was taken back by Jesus too. Just his wording and his communication with him. Now, it doesn't say specifically that he believed who he said he was, but you can see a passion that Pilate had, where he was like, why don't you answer me? I'm trying to save you. Like, could you just give me something? But the biggest reason why here, we can understand that his wife was having dreams and visions and different things given to her. She told him, you don't want anything to do with this. If you do this, and his blood is on your hands, there's no saving you. So now he has his boss threatening him with his life. He has the love of his life, his wife, telling him, you want nothing to do with this. And then he has Jesus himself, who I have a feeling was impacting his heart too. But here he is, trying to be between two worlds. He was trying to basically say, okay, I have a job to do, I have my family to take care of, and I have to follow what I I feel in my heart. Sound familiar? How many of us have family? A job? Our heart? God's calling? Yeah, we've never really looked at, I've always looked at Pilate this way. It wasn't just a bad guy or a guy put in power. I mean, he had a million things going on. I can relate to him. Would I have done the same thing to him if my life was online, if my family's life was online? Regardless of who stands there, how many times we put our jobs above Jesus? How many times we put our families above Jesus? I'm one. I've done it. Am I the only one? Really? No one else? I am Chris? Okay, thanks, buddy. So, I find no basis for charge against him. The Jewish leaders insisted, we have a law, and according to the law, he must die, because he claims to be the Son of God. Now, we already talked about this in the last couple books or chapters. Here, they're crying out about the law. They want the law to work for them. Yet everything they did to Jesus, guess what? Was against their own laws. Having a trial at night, having the accuser speak on his behalf, all against their Jewish laws. Yet here, well, we have a law, we have to uphold it. Sound familiar? We always want the laws to work for us. We don't want them to work against us. I kind of relate that back to our walk. How many times do we want the prayer thing to work for us, but not against us? You know, unanswered prayers that are always better than what we asked for in the first place? But we don't want that, do we? In the moment, what do we want? We want the prayer answered. But how many times later down the road do we notice those unanswered prayers were the best prayer we could have had? So they want the law to work for them, even though they themselves did not abide by it. When Pilate heard this, he was even more afraid, and he went back inside the palace. Where do you come from? He asked Jesus, but Jesus gave him no answer. Do you refuse to speak to me? Pilate said. Don't you realize I have power either to free you or to crucify you? See, I still think he's trying to, I think this is twofold. And again, we can relate this back to us. I think this is twofold. One, I think he's trying to figure out who Jesus is. And I think we all do that in our lives, especially as baby Christians. Even years into my walk, there's times and moments I'm like trying to play, Jesus, hey, Jesus. You know, kind of playing a little back and forth. It doesn't work that way. But I see him right here trying to say, look, even though he doesn't get it yet, obviously he doesn't get who Jesus is because he has no authority over Jesus, like none of us do. But he was still trying to say, I'm trying to save your life. Like, look, I understand. You're someone important. I don't know who yet, but I know you're somebody important. Like, give me something to save your life. And Jesus, what does he do? He's like, dude, come on. Let's see what he says. Jesus answered, you have no power over me if it were not given to you from above. Therefore, the one who handed me over to you is guiltier of the sin. Jesus being Jesus. Again, I've already said this before in some other sermons. I wish I had 10% of the way Jesus was a ninja with telling people that they're being dumb. He could do it so lovingly, so caringly. I have no filter. My wife says it all the time. I get that. I'm working on it. But Jesus could say the most outlandish, just blatant things to people. And they'd be like, oh my gosh, you're right. Now, if I did that, I'd be in trouble. Jesus could do it, though. And here's another example. He was just flat out telling him, you have no authority. Don't worry about it. And what was he doing? At the same time, again, Jesus, after being flogged, crown of thorns on his head, punched, smacked, and everything else, who does he care about in this passage? What does he just say to him? He's relieving his guilt. He said to him, don't worry, you don't have authority. Guess what? The people that brought me to you are more guiltier than you are. even being beaten and flogged and going to be hanging on a cross, he took a moment to relieve the pressure from Pilate. Now, did Pilate get it or understand it? Probably not in the moment. But look at this. He stood there and cared so much about him that he said to him, don't worry, you got no authority. You were only given the authority that was given to you by my Father. And guess what? It's okay. Because those that brought me to you, you know, the Jewish Pharisees that should know better, they're guiltier than you are. From then on, Pilate tried to set Jesus free, but the Jewish leaders kept shouting, if you let this man go, you are no friend of Caesar's. Anyone who claims to be a king opposes Caesar. So, the Jewish people not getting what they want, and it even states again, Pilate tried to set him free, tried to let him go without dying, but again, who was the more victor there? The Jews. Wanted him dead. And what did the Jewish people do? What does Satan do in our lives? Pokes where he knows he can poke. Stabs where he knows he can stab. Now, I know you all in relationships have never done this to your spouses, right? Because we know the sweet spots to stab, don't we? And when we want to, we can stab. They did the same thing. They knew his job was on the line. They knew that his head could be on a pipe. They knew it. They knew if he messed up. And they knew exactly what to say to get what they wanted. Oh, well, you won't give us what we want, but guess what? If we go to Caesar, not only will we get what we want, but you'll be dead. See, this is a heart issue, but it's also a sin issue. That's what sin does. The Jewish people were so worried about losing power or losing money or losing whatever they were afraid of losing, they would send an innocent man to die. This is nothing more than just jealousy. This is nothing more than pride. That's all this is. When Pilate heard this, he brought Jesus out and sat down on the judge's seat at a place known as the Stone Pavement. It was the day of the preparation of the Passover. It was about noon. Here is your king, Pilate said to the Jews. But they shouted, take him away, crucify him. Shall I crucify your king? Pilate asked. We have no king but Caesar, the chief priest answered. Mind you, the chief priest. Which begs me to wonder. See, there's only one king that we should be following. And yes, in America, we have a government that we listen to, but only when it doesn't interfere with our relationship with God. Here, they were so caught up in anger and greed and everything else that they would dare say we have no other king but Caesar. Let's think about that for a minute. The high priest, out of his own mouth, the high priest of the one and only God, said, we have no king but Caesar. Shall I crucify your king? Pilate asked. We have no king but Caesar, the chief priest answered. Finally, Pilate handed over to them to be crucified. See, how many times in our lives do we do this to other people? We get caught up in anger or frustration or things aren't going our way. And all we want is vengeance. All we want is our anger to go away. And we think the way to make our anger go away is by punishing those that do it to us, or that's causing that issue, or causing that pain. See, that's why Jesus taught love. The only true way to make anger go away is to love. I understand that's contradictory. And trust me, I'm still learning this lesson every day. Again, if I'm the only one, am I the only one, Chris? I'm 2 for 2 then. 2 for 2 today. It's hard. When you're hurt, all you want to do is hurt. God teaches us when you're hurt, love those that hurt you. More so than they even deserve. Because I first loved you when you were not worthy of love. See, even in the midst of being flogged, punished, and crucified, he reached out to Pilate. He was reaching out to his disciples. Why do you think before this in the garden and in the Passover, Jesus did what he did for his disciples? When he comes back, and we'll read about this coming up, when he comes back and he talks to Peter, Peter denied him 3 times. 3 times. Jesus called it. And one of the first things he does is pull Peter aside and say, hey, it's all right. But do you love me? See, what does it go back to? Love. Which is something, at this point, the Jewish leaders did not have. They wanted their pain, their anger, their frustration to go away. And they thought killing Jesus would take care of that. Well, obviously, as we know thousands of years later, did it work? Did crucifying Jesus work? Nah, it made it worse for them. Because Christians haven't gone away, they've only flourished. So the soldiers took charge of Jesus, carrying his own cross. He went out to the place of the skull. There they crucified him, and with him 2 others, one on each side, and Jesus in the middle. See, we know from other Gospels there were thieves, prisoners, they deserved it. We also know the fact, and we'll get into this later on, but I do want to touch on this again. What happens on the cross? We know this. One accepts Jesus, the other one sticks to his sinful, arrogant self. And what did we learn from that? Once again, he showed compassion and love and mercy for Jesus because he even told the other thief, he doesn't deserve this. We deserve this. By that action of humility, which the Jewish people did not show, ironically, let's take a look at this. So the Jewish leaders yelled, crucify him. A thief hanging on a cross cried out for compassion for Jesus because he didn't deserve it. Kind of ironic, don't you think? That scripturally that would be based. The Jews, the most religious people, God's chosen people, cried out to kill Jesus. A criminal cried for compassion on Jesus. Pilate had a notice prepared and fastened to the cross. It read, Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. Many of the Jews read this sign. The place where Jesus was crucified was near the city. And the sign was written in Arabic, Latin, and Greek. The chief priests of the Jews protested to Pilate, do not write the King of the Jews, but that this man claimed to be the King of the Jews. Pilate answered, what I have written, I have written. So here's a man. Do we know he was saved? Do we not know he was saved? We don't know. But this is part of what I think Jesus did get to him. Why else, being in an authoritative position, knowing you're going to upset people by putting the King of the Jews on it, would you do it? Unless Jesus somehow got to your heart. He could have put claims. He could have put nothing. But he put the King of the Jews for a reason. And he even told them, what I wrote, deal with it. I'm not changing it. See, Jesus was hanging on a cross, and even in the action of him being beaten within his life, carrying a cross, nailed to the cross, hanging there, it didn't satisfy that anger. It didn't satisfy that quench for justice or vindication. Because Jesus is love. They couldn't get to him. You know, Wendy and I have been married for almost 13 years now. And I started to realize if I want to upset her, if she's upset at me, I just be nice. And she does it to me. And trust me, if she wants to get me going, she's just as nice to me no matter what I do. But let's think about that. I don't get upset. I don't get angry. She's fuming, or I'm fuming. And you just sit there and smile. You just take it. Because you don't give them what they want. It's like a child. If they're throwing a fit, do you buy them that toy? No. Why? Because they won't learn. See, even hanging on the cross, Jesus still showed compassion and love. He was taking his last breaths, and he showed compassion and love. To the point, we're not in John, but in the other chapters or books we read, he looked at the thief and said, can you imagine? Literally suffocating to death because you're hanging on a cross. Your back's already torn to shreds from the cat's nine tail. And you look over, and your concern is saving the person next to you. That's what Jesus did. He gave that person hope because he showed humility. Enough to be standing in front of all those that crucified them to say, look, we deserve this. I'm fine hanging here. He doesn't deserve it. Pilate to the point where he was reached by Jesus going through all his trials. What I wrote. Deal with it. To me, he's the King of the Jews. Deal with it. When the soldiers crucified Jesus, they took his clothes, divided them into 4 shares, one for each of them, with the undergarments remaining. The garments was seamless, woven into one piece from top to bottom. Let's not tear it, they said to one another. Let's decide by lot who will get it. This happened so that Scripture might be fulfilled, that it said. They divided my clothes among them and casted lots for my garments. Again, this is what I pointed to earlier. Out of everything any individual has ever lived and will ever live, no one did what Jesus did. Do you know why? Simple answer. Because Jesus is the Son of God. He was the only one that could do it. But even to the point of the crucifixion, you understand this, Roman soldiers who knew nothing about Jesus, nothing about God, they believed in many gods, followed God's will to fulfill Scripture. Are we understanding this? This is what I get excited about. Let's think about this for a second. Soldiers that believed in crucified Jesus did exactly what God predicted they would do. That's the God we serve. A God that is such control that even those that don't know his name will do his will. Because they had to. Because it was predestined in the Old Testament, foreshadowed, foretold, they would gamble for his clothes. It was also, as we get to the crucifixion, not a bone was broken. So the man holding the spear, the man holding the hammer, did they break his knee? No. You know why? They couldn't. You know why? Because God said so. His body would not be broken. So men that shredded him. And again, let's go back to even more. What did Jesus say? Wait a minute. Something about authority, something about, oh, that's right. We only have the power that is given to us to have. See, they couldn't gamble over Jesus if God didn't say so. Jesus wouldn't have been handed over if God didn't say so. Pilate wouldn't have written what he wrote if God didn't say so. See, we can look at this a couple different ways and say, okay, then God, why did you have to die if you're so powerful? We can get into that debate. Jeremy would love to get into that debate. I know Jeremy, he's fuming, right? He's ready to jump in. We can tackle that another day. I'm not going to touch on that today. It's a plain, simple answer. There needs to be a sacrifice. And it had to be perfect. It had to be blameless. None of us can do that. We're not good enough. And that's okay. Because we serve the one that is. Near the cross of Jesus stood his mother. And I really want you guys to listen to this part, because we've already kind of talked about how Jesus cared about others. He cared about Pilate. And I understand that you guys could argue, you could say that maybe he didn't. I think he handled Pilate very tenderly. I think he handled him very politely, very nicely. But here, we see his mother. Mind you, he was already beaten, dragged across the desert, hung on a cross. And where was his focus and concern? Not on himself. His mother. Near the cross of Jesus stood his mother's sister Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother there, and the disciples whom he loved standing nearby, he said to her, "Woman." And mind you, this is not a slang use of woman. This is a tender, loving way to say woman. So, here is your son. And to the disciples, here is your mother. From that time on, the disciples took her into his home. You know, we live in a world where we're taught the bigger house, the bigger cars, the more stuff we have, that's what makes you happy. We serve a God that tells us love is the way that you become happy. And not just the worldly love. Let's get this straight. There's a lot of definitions of love. I'm not talking about worldly standards of love. I'm talking about righteous, biblical understanding of love. The same love as he was hung, beaten, dying on the cross, would care to look at his mother and make sure she was taken care of. The same love that he showed to his disciples. I still have a hard time understanding. He washed the feet of Judas. Now, it's one thing if I'm nice to somebody and I don't know they're going to betray me. But he knew. He knew. Even knowing his love was so great, his compassion for his creation was so great, that he would wash the feet of the one that would betray him. Pilate, the one that would ultimately send him to death, he had so much compassion and love for him that he even told him, "You're good. The ones that brought me here are more to blame than you are. You don't have the authority to do what you think you have." To hanging on the cross to a thief to his right and his left. To care so much with the humility that the one had. To say, "You'll be with me in heaven today. Don't worry about it. You're good." To the point of seeing his crying mother and making sure that she was taken care of. See, this crucifixion could be about the pain and the martyr. We all know as Christians and believers that this is ultimately the reason why we are saved, because of this sacrifice.
Amen.
And we'll talk about that more, obviously, next week. But today I wanted to speak on humility and love and grace. That's how we are to be. If we're to follow in Jesus' footsteps, that's how we are to be. We're to love. We're to give. We're to care about others more than ourselves. We're to understand that the God we serve, to control Roman soldiers, that only purpose in life was to kill and destroy. But even God can control that. So his will be done. See, this life's not about us. This life's about God and Jesus. It's about the things that he did on that cross to bring us back to him. Let's pray. God, thank you for today. Just thank you so much for everything that you've done for us. God, thank you for the fact that even in your final hours here on earth, God, that you showed us humility and love and grace. God, we may not understand everything that's happening, God, and we may not always understand why prayers aren't answered and things don't happen and why things lay out the way they do, God. God, it's because of you that we stand here today. God, we love you so much. Thank you for the fact of taking up the cross and being flogged and beaten and mocked for our salvation. God, thank you so much for first loving us even before we loved you. God, I pray that you guide us for the weeks and months to come, God, that you show us how we're to care for one another. And God, even in showing and guiding, it's not always about agreeing. It's not always about getting along. It's not always about, love is not about compromise, God. But love is about loving someone enough to tell them the truth and share the gospel and the good news with them. God, we love you, and we pray these things in your name.